Good morning. Merry Christmas. Welcome to Sunday, December 26th at Roncesvalles United Church. This is always a very special Sunday for us. John O'Keefe, scientist, philosopher, offers his annual Christmas address. I always learn something from John, and this year he's talking about the difficult conversation about God and evolution. There's so many people who think that having evolved as much as we can physically, we are now in a time of incredible spiritual evolution. And I can promise you that John's going to give you a lot to think about. You're going to end up not only having enjoyed his talk, but you're going to feel smarter. And I thank you for John for that every year. We also had the poem by Margot, and now Kathy Borg is going to lead us in our opening prayer. So thanks for being with us this morning, and thank you to everyone who's participated.
Ebullience. And so spins, so spins, so spins. Every new ending, a new beginning. Tempered by time's whimsy and want. The manger swells with vibrant possibility. And ebullient braying warms us, no matter the bite in the air.
God, as this new year approaches,
help us to begin again.
When we become distracted by ambitions or pretensions,
Help us to begin again.
When we forget to honor the Christ light that shines in each of us,
Help us to begin again.
And when we neglect the wisdom you've placed in our hearts,
Help us to begin
again. When we are lost and fearful, forgetting your eternal presence in our lives,
help us to begin again.
So that we may share your vision, know your peace, and live in your love, knowing that with your help, we can always begin again.
For those of you who may be new to this parish, this is the time of year where we have a little chat about seemingly strange bedfellows, modern science and religion. Now, this year's thoughts come as they usually do. They spring from my work, which is the science of sound. And in that work, we have to apply a lot of computer power. It's been that way since I started way back in the 1980s, all that computer work. But more recently, we've been trying to really put it to the computers, no longer telling them what to do, but perhaps have them tell us what to do. You've heard about it before, and hardly a day goes by in your life where it doesn't touch your world. Artificial intelligence. Sounds a bit scary, doesn't it, having a computer tell you what to do? It's really not all that scary, and in fact, it's downright natural. Partially because the computer doesn't really tell me what to do. It just makes suggestions. The computer is only trying to mimic the observations that we have made of the natural world and then, kind of speed things up a bit. The little corner of the AI universe that has me preoccupied these days deals with something called genetic or evolutionary algorithms. Okay, so 2 big words, and I'll tackle them one at a time, and I'll start with the easy one first. What on earth is an algorithm? Well, it's something like the cross between an equation and a recipe. So what you do is you add a bunch of things together in a certain order and certain quantities, and then you repeat that over and over again. So, okay, for most of us, that bunch of things might be a certain number of eggs, a little bit of salt, a certain amount of milk, but the eggs go in before the milk, then you apply some heat, not too much, not too little. You taste things at the end, and then tomorrow morning you repeat it. That's a recipe. For me, in my algorithms, what I'll do is I'll take a big panel of wood, and it'll be hanging up there over your head, and it's going to have certain dimensions, and it's tilted at a certain angle, and all kinds of other variables, and I'm going to try to make sure that thing is going to reflect sound to you as best in the best way possible. That's an algorithm. The evolutionary part comes in when you start tweaking your recipe. Perhaps you might add a bit of milk one day, mushrooms the next day. In my algorithm, maybe I'll change the size of that piece of wood, or I'll tilt it a little bit more. And if we tweak things enough and repeat things enough, hopefully the algorithm or the recipe will evolve into something better. The difference between the two is we humans tweak the recipe. The algorithm tweaks itself. So, that's one of the more important algorithms in artificial intelligence today, the genetic algorithm based on evolution and natural selection. Now, in the past, people have had trouble putting the words evolution and God side by side in the same sentence, and some people still do. It all got started with that nefarious natural philosopher, Charles Darwin. Actually, Darwin was never really all that nasty, but some of the people who adopted his ideas were. Corrupted his ideas might be a more accurate word. Survival of the fittest are not his words, and it does not mean survival of the strongest. It means survival of the fittest, the best fit for the environment that a creature finds itself in and adapts itself towards. Social Darwinism is also an unfortunate offspring, and again, it has been incorrectly associated with this name. Now, the idea originally came from a prominent English philosopher at the time, a fellow named Herbert Spencer. And excuse me, Darwin was influenced by Spencer's work, as was Charles Dickens. And it was Dickens, I think, who best articulated the concept of Spencer's ideas in the words of Scrooge, so familiar to us at this time of year, in a book published, I'll point out, some 16 years before Darwin's. If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the population. Social Darwinism was quite popular at the beginning of the 20th century, and with adherents ranging from, the American robber barons to George Bernard Shaw, and here at home, and of all people, Nellie McClung. Yeah, eugenics and the Nazis put an end to all that. But the corruption, I suggest, is still with us, not through forced sterilization and eugenic killings, but through what I call spiritual sterilization of so many of us, especially in our youth. The idea that if evolution is real, God is not. There is no in between. It's Darwin's way or the highway. Well, sorry, fellas, I don't quite see it like that. And I seriously doubt that Darwin would either. What the undeniable truth of evolution offers us is not a rejection of God's existence, but rather a new window into the glory of his or her being. Now, the story of Adam and Eve, this is a man-made construct, thought by many to be divinely inspired, but in the end, a human interpretation. But the concept of evolution, so simple that even a computer can do it, is so profound that it makes the mind stagger. And listen, I know that sounds like bookish, ivory tower, navel-gazing, to be staggered by a concept. But let's think about it. Have you ever been staggered by the beauty of nature? By the beauty of a flower, by the beauty of your children? Well, how did it all get there? By the beauty of an idea, God's idea, the concept of evolution. Excuse me. There's something that used to trouble me. I used to worry that our concept of God is sometimes just a repository for the things we don't understand, in particular things of a material concern. And by material concern, I'm not talking about a trip to the shopping mall. I mean, the age-old debate between the material and the spiritual. Excuse me. Since we started calling nerdy people like me scientists, which was somewhere around 1830 or so, science has constantly been finding better explanations for the material world. Impressive? Yes, but only for material things. There are no scientific formulae for world peace, for inner peace, for inequality. Medical science has yet to come up with a cure for hate. Need I go on? Few of us these days think of a bolt of lightning as an act of a vengeful God who somehow got out of sorts. It's the same thing as that stuff that comes out of the hole in the wall over there. Electricity, right? Well, let's think about that. Electricity was not discovered by Benjamin Franklin, as American mythology might tell us, but rather by a collection of men working in different places at different times. But it was a Scottish fellow named James Clerk Maxwell. We have a Scot in the congregation. He brought it all together, mid-19th century, with four, take my word for it, indecipherable equations. It took me years to figure them out. Our modern world would be unrecognizable without his work. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, think about it the next time we have a blackout. Maxwell is one of history's great unknown scientists, and along with Newton, one of the very few that Einstein ever looked up to. James Clerk Maxwell was a devout evangelical Presbyterian who learned the Psalms by heart as a child and in later life was an elder of the Church of Scotland. Throughout his life, he remained rather skeptical of anyone trying to drive a wedge between science and religion. He saw no conflict between the two. Clerk Maxwell was not out to prove that God does or does not exist, nor was his contemporary, Charles Darwin, also a religious man. Their discoveries do not challenge the existence of God or Yahweh or Allah, nor, I'm quite sure, were they ever intended to. But they do challenge our definition of that higher power that we might call God or Yahweh or Allah. If evolution is indeed God's way, and I suggest it is, perhaps we can put it to use and evolve our definition of God. Which brings me to another thing that has troubled me from time to time. Science is constantly updating itself. When a new idea comes along, that's no big deal. But religion can't seem to do that. And part of this, I think, comes from inertia. You know, the bigger you are, the slower you move. And that goes for institutions as well as people. Our Christian tradition is 2,000 years old. Our Judaic forefathers, perhaps 3,500 years. Compared to this, science is a baby, only 200 or 300 years old. So, you know, perhaps science perhaps they're a bit more nimble on their feet these days. But our still waters run deep. Our reservoir is rich with insights into the human condition that science couldn't touch if it tried. There's a lot of thought that's gone into all this, and we can't change willy-nilly the way the scientists do. But we can, and I think perhaps it's our duty to, consider change, to find a way to improve our understanding of God, to evolve our understanding of God. You know, it wasn't always so difficult to change. 2,000 years ago, we, as Christians, were just another one of those crazy messianic sects of Judaism. There were all kinds of ideas floating around then. There, new ones and borrowed ones. As many of you know, we borrowed some ideas from Plato, a big influence on early Christian thought. But here's something you may not know. Plato borrowed some of his ideas from a bunch of mathematicians. In his early 20s, Plato toured what is now southern Italy and was deeply influenced by the Pythagoreans. The followers of Pythagoras weren't so much a study group as they were a religious sect. They believed that mathematics was the language of the gods. And you can still hear mathematicians making that apparently vainglorious claim today. But here's the thing. They could be right. Unlike the physical or the biological sciences, once you have developed a mathematical proof, it will always be true. It is an eternal truth. So, for example, about 300 years ago, Newton came up with the concept and the explanation of gravity that quite literally makes our world go around, which was great. That's fantastic. Until about 200 years later, and this other guy named Einstein came up with an even better explanation. Science can accept that kind of change. Just because Einstein came up with a better idea than Newton doesn't make Newton a nobody. Religion seems to have a harder time with that, though. The reality is that most scientific truths are ephemeral. Mathematical truths, on the other hand, are eternal. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. And to hearken back to the Pythagoreans, if you add the squares of two sides of a right-angled triangle, it will always equal the square of the third side. And I know that might sound a bit arcane. There might be a bit of a, who cares factor in there. But take my word, this building would not be standing without the handiwork of Pythagoras some 2,500 years ago. So, if the Pythagoreans and their follower, Plato, could embrace the eternal truths of mathematics as the eternal truth of God, why can't we embrace such a beautiful algorithm as evolution? It is indeed an eternal truth, like God's truth. We might even call it God's algorithm. I remember a couple years ago giving you a thought experiment, and I'd like to leave you with another one this year, okay? Imagine one day an old friend of yours called Bill tells you his name is actually Bob. Now, you've always known him as Bill, but no, his name was Bob all the time. That doesn't mean that somehow he was never Bob before you met him, that somehow he was somebody else, or that he was never Bill after you met him. It's only a name. It's a label. Now, you might know your friend Bill/Bob as a mild-mannered accountant, and then one day you find out he's doing stand-up comedy on the nightclub circuit. Oh, is this a different Bill? Is this a different Bob? No, he's still the same person. Your perception or your understanding of Bob does not change who Bob is, and will never change the reality of being Bob. What we understood about God in the past, in an agrarian age, or even in our growing understanding today in a scientific age, does not change the reality of God. And it never will. Nor will a name, nor will a new idea, rather an old idea. Algorithms are nothing new. And I'll give you a quick background. In the Dark Ages, when the Christian world was floundering, Islamic mathematics flourished. The word algorithm comes from that period. It recognizes the contributions of the 13th century mathematician named Muhammad al-Khwarizm. But hold on. The idea is even older than that. Older than life itself. Let me put it this way, okay? The Garden of Eden, great story, right? On the first day and all that. Well, what happened the day before? Ever think of that? Somebody came up with the idea of evolution. Pretty smart chap, this fellow God now, isn't he? Thank you very much for your time.
Yes! Woo! Thank you, John.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for the opportunity.
for joining us today. And please join us on Sunday, January 6th. We're still going to be online, but you can look for our recording then. We're going to talk about creative beginnings. And now, may the love of God, may the guidance and presence of our guide, Jesus Christ, may the fellowship and communion of the Holy Spirit rest and abide upon us, everyone, now and forever. Amen.